Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for recognizing that this committee should be above any attacks on our president. Thank you for the opportunity to be here to discuss these existing and emerging drug threats. As a representative from the Sunshine State in Florida, we are all too familiar with the consequences of open borders and how every town in America has been turned into a border town and state as a result of open borders. Over 100,000 individuals have lost their lives to fentanyl poisoning every single year, and should this have been an airline incident where 100,000 people were going down, it would have never taken as long in order to start addressing it. It is absolutely infuriating, and sir, I want to express, as many of my colleagues have here today, our tremendous sympathies and condolences for your loss. It never should have happened in the first place. The opioid epidemic remains a persistent crisis, claiming lives at an alarming rate. Synthetic drugs like fentanyl have become increasingly potent and pervasive, exacerbating the public health emergency. And new substances continue to emerge, often faster than our regulatory and enforcement framework can adapt to. These substances not only threaten public health, but also strain our healthcare systems and law enforcement resources. This hearing has been a fantastic opportunity to look at the full scope of the threats and to talk broadly about strategies that we can put together to address them. Now, my first question is for you, Sheriff. I am actually the wife of a first responder. My husband, Matt, is a 18-year career firefighter SWAT medic. So he has been on the front lines dealing with this, and we collectively have understood for the past 10 years it is not a matter of if, but when he himself becomes a victim of fentanyl poisoning because of how many people he encounters on a daily basis that are overdosing. So given the rapid evolution of the synthetic drug analogs, what technologies does law enforcement have to detect the substances, if you could touch on that very briefly, but more importantly, address if these mechanisms are sufficient to detect the new and emerging threats. As these drugs continue to evolve, different strains, new additives, it becomes very tough to test for them. So can you talk about if we are keeping pace with the molecular changes in the drugs and what strategies are in place, or what do we need to adopt in order to have timely identification to keep our first responders safe, and then we can properly schedule them?
That's a complex, layered question. I think a lot of that goes to the difficulty of us understanding what has changed in a lab that's basically a nation-state lab that has abilities and facilities way beyond ours, and they're trying to dial in what is no longer scheduled or what they think will be profitable or deadly or whatever the adjective is. So I think a big part of that is for us as a country to put pressure on the countries in whatever way you and the president deem is appropriate to let them know there's consequences for doing that, for constantly sending things to America, whether it's China or through Mexico with the cartels, that there's real consequences for them to intentionally do that and keep trying to stay one step ahead of our regulating or our scheduling of what they just used to make a big profit on. In terms of the technology and equipment, it's hard to say what we need because we don't know what's coming at us. And that's a big challenge for us on the local level. As I said, brought up earlier, I did not know we had xylazine in our lab until we specifically went to look for it because I had heard it being found in other states a number of years ago. So sometimes we don't even know what we don't know until it's upon us because we have very well-funded nation-state adversaries or cartels that are obviously very flush with cash that can do these things, and then they end up in our lap before we even know it comes down the pike.
Thank you. And I'm going to have a bunch of follow-up questions for you, but in the interest of time, I'm going to turn to you, Dr. Westlake. Given the increasing prevalence of fentanyl, its analogs, and other synthetic opioids in overdose cases, could you discuss the differences in treatment protocols for fentanyl-related overdoses compared to other opioid analogs? And again, I know we need to be sensitive to fentanyl and carfentanil being used in medical settings, so if you could address that.
Sure. The receptor that the antidotes use are the same for whether it's a synthetic opioid or natural opioid. The problem comes when they're flooded with massive amounts, And in that case, you just need to use more of the Narcan. There's some space for a more potent antidote. The antidotes, Narcan works, you just have to get it to the person before they're dead from not breathing. So the issue is getting the interdiction of the Narcan to the patient, or stopping the patient from taking the poison and the deadly opioid to begin with.
Now, what challenges do emergency personnel face in quickly identifying the specific substances involved in an overdose? And how would this ultimately impact outcomes? The reason where I'm going with this is to our point originally, how can we get ahead in making sure that when EMTs, medics are on site, are on scene, that if they're dealing with a patient, they can test quickly so they know what to test for, but how they can best protect themselves as well?
At the level in the emergency department, you just treat for the respiratory suppression that's there. A lot of times we don't even know what people are overdosing from. So we treat the symptoms that cause the respiratory suppression. So you treat symptomatically. So it may be difficult to. It doesn't kind of matter what your opioid you took. What matters is that we got you breathing again and that we got.
Okay. Thank you. I yield.
The gentlelady yields. The chair now